Before sunrise, a farm kid in the 1960s already knew a dozen sounds by heart, and almost every one of them is gone now. The whir of a machine in the milk house, a bell that could reach across 40 acres, a telephone that rang in a pattern only your family answered to. Number 11, vanished the day the co-op stopped reading prices over the air. Number 4 is a sound nobody under 60 has ever truly heard twice. And the sound at number 1 could stop a kid cold in the middle of a cornfield and turn him straight toward home. These weren't just noises, they were the heartbeat of a way of life that machines, highways, and television quietly erased. Hit subscribe if you grew up with any of these. Let's count down. 25 sounds every farm kid heard that you'll never hear again. Number 25, the screen door spring and slap. Every farmhouse in America had one, and every one of them sang the same two-note song. First, the long, stretching twang of the coil spring as the door swung wide, then the flat wooden crack as it bounced shut against the frame. A farm kid learned that sound before he learned to read, and he learned exactly how much trouble it carried. Slam it once, and Mama hollered from the kitchen. Slam it twice, and you ran. By the early 60s, a wooden screen door and its spring cost about $1 at the hardware store, cheap enough that nobody thought twice when the wood warped and gray. The slap of that door meant somebody had come in from chores, that the morning had begun, that supper was close. When aluminum storm doors with their soft pneumatic closers took over in the 70s, the twang and the crack disappeared together, replaced by a polite little hiss that nobody ever remembers. Number 24, the hand pump squeak. Out by the kitchen door or down at the stock tank stood the cast iron pitcher pump, and pulling water from it was a sound you felt in your shoulder before you heard it in your ears. The dry, rusty squeak of the handle on the upstroke, the hollow gurgle as the leathers caught, then the heavy gush of cold water hitting the bucket. On a frosty morning, you primed it with a dipper of water saved from the night before, and the squeak came slower, stiffer, complaining in the cold. A pump that ran dry was a small disaster. Kids were sent to work that handle 100 times a day for the wash basin, the chickens, the garden. When rural electrification finally reached the back roads and pressure tanks put running water in the kitchen, the old pump rusted shut. Today, its squeak survives only on antique handles bolted to flower beds. Number 23, the coffee percolator. Long before the drip machine and its silent green light, the morning kitchen filled with the steady, rhythmic blurp of a percolator working over the heat. The pot ticked as it warmed, then began its patient knocking, a wet bubble climbing the glass knob on the lid every few seconds, faster and faster as the coffee grew strong. A farm wife had it going before 4 in the morning because the men were already pulling on boots. That sound, the soft percussive blurp blurp under the rattle of the wood stove, was the sound of a household coming awake while the windows were still black. The smell followed it down the hall and woke the kids. Electric drip coffee makers swept the country in the 70s and silenced the whole performance. Now coffee arrives without a sound, and a generation has never heard a pot announce that the day had officially started. Number 22, the cream separator. In the milk house off the back of the barn stood a tall hand-crank cream separator, and the sound it made was unlike anything else on the place. You poured the warm milk in the top bowl, then turned the crank, slow at first, until the bell inside stopped ringing and the whole machine settled into a high, smooth, rising whine. Faster and faster, the spinning bowl climbed in pitch until it hummed like a swarm of bees trapped in steel. Skim milk ran out one spout for the hogs and calves, and thick yellow cream curled out the other for churning and selling. A De Laval separator was one of the proudest purchases a dairy family ever made. The morning and evening whine of it cutting cream from milk meant the farm was earning its keep. When bulk tanks and creamery trucks made home separating pointless, that rising hum fell silent for good. Number 21, the wringer washer. Monday was wash day, and the whole house knew it by sound. The agitator sloshed back and forth with a heavy, thumping rhythm, water and overalls churning in a tub of gray suds. But the sound a kid remembered was the wringer, two rubber rollers turning with a wet, squeezing groan as Mama fed each shirt and sheet through by hand, the water hissing out in a flat ribbon back into the tub. Everybody was warned to keep their fingers clear of those rollers, and everybody knew a story about somebody who hadn't. By 1960, plenty of farm families still ran wringer machines on the back porch because they were tough, cheap, and didn't need much water. The slosh and the groan and the slap of wet clothes filled the morning. Automatic spin cycles ended all of it, and the most dangerous, most familiar sound of wash day disappeared. Number 20, the treadle sewing machine. In the front room or by the kitchen window sat the cast iron singer mounted on its black wrought stand, and a farm kid fell asleep to the sound of it more nights than he could count. The rocking clatter of the foot treadle going up and down, the leather belt slapping softly around its wheel, the needle stitching in a quick mechanical tick, tick, tick that sped up and slowed down with Mama's foot. She made school clothes from feed sack cotton, patched knees, turned collars, hemmed flour sack curtains, all powered by nothing but her own 2 feet rocking that pedal in the lamplight. A good treadle machine lasted 3 generations and never needed a plug. The rhythm of it working after the supper dishes were done was the sound of a mother stretching $1 into a wardrobe. Electric machines hummed in to replace it, and the gentle rocking clatter slipped out of the American home. Number 19, the corn sheller. Before everything ran through a combine, there were long winter evenings spent shelling seed corn by hand on a cast iron sheller bolted to a box in the corner of the granary. You dropped an ear into the hopper and cranked, and the machine answered with a hard, grinding rattle as the kernels tore free and rained into the bucket below, the bare cob spitting out the side onto a growing pile. The sound was relentless, mechanical, a dry clatter that filled the whole building. Kids took turns at the crank until their arms ached, and the reward was a pail of golden kernels for the chickens or next spring's planting. A hand sheller cost a few dollars and lasted a lifetime. That grinding rattle was the soundtrack of 1,000 cold evenings. Modern picking and shelling all happen at once now, out in the field, inside a roaring machine nobody stands beside. Number 18, the wood cook stove. The kitchen ran on a cast iron range, and it talked all day long, the crackle and pop of split oak catching in the firebox, the metallic clank of the lid lifter as Mama dropped in another stick, the low roar up the chimney when the draft was open and the fire was hungry, and outside the steady chunk of the splitting maul on the chopping block, somebody always laying in more wood. A farm kid's chore list started and ended with that wood box, and an empty one earned a scolding. The stove never went cold from October to April. It cooked the meals, heated the water, dried the mittens, and warmed the backs pressed against it on a January morning. Propane and electric ranges arrived clean and quiet and instant. The crackle, the clank, and the roar all went with the old iron when it was hauled to the scrap pile. Number 17, The milk cans. Before bulk tanks, every dairy morning ended with the clang and ring of 10-gallon steel milk cans. Full cans were wrestled onto the stand by the road, lids hammered down tight, and when the milk hauler's truck rolled up at dawn, the whole operation rang like a steel band, cans banging together, lids rattling, the empties clattering back down onto the concrete. You could hear the truck coming a half-mile off and hear it leave with your morning's work, bound for the creamery. A full can weighed nearly 100 pounds, and learning to swing one up onto the stand was a rite of passage. That bright, ringing clang of steel on steel was the sound of cash leaving the farm. Refrigerated bulk tanks and tanker trucks made cans obsolete almost overnight in the 60s, and the clang faded from every country road in America. Number 16. The cowbell. Somewhere out in the pasture, the lead cow wore a bell, and its clonk drifted across the fields all day long, slow and hollow and easy. A farm kid sent to bring the herd in at milking time followed his ears more than his eyes, listening for that uneven clank moving through the brush down by the creek. When the bell went still too long, you went looking, because a quiet cow was a cow in the wrong place. The bell told you where the herd was at dusk, in the fog over the next hill. It was the original tracking device, a few dollars of stamped steel hung on a leather strap. As fences tightened, herds shrank, and electronics took over, the cowbell went quiet. That lazy, hollow clunk drifting on the evening air is a sound the modern countryside has almost entirely forgotten. Number 15. The two-cylinder John Deere. Nothing on the farm sounded like an old two-cylinder John Deere, and farm kids could name the tractor coming up the lane with their eyes shut. The whole country called it the Johnny Popper for the reason you heard the second it fired. A slow, loping, uneven pop, 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 like a giant heartbeat, each cylinder firing with a lazy lope that rose to a steady chant as the throttle opened. It echoed off the barn and rolled across the section all day during planting and haying. A used Model A or B could be had for a few $100s, and it ran on almost anything you fed it. That distinctive popping rhythm was the pulse of spring fieldwork from Iowa to Georgia. When Deere switched to smooth 4- and 6-cylinder engines in 1960, the popping heartbeat began to fade, and the most recognizable tractor sound in America became a collector's memory. Number 14, the threshing crew. Before the combine, harvest meant the threshing machine, and it brought a sound no single farmer ever made alone. A steel monster parked in the yard, belt driven off a tractor, roaring and shaking as bundles of grain were pitched into its maw, straw blowing out the long spout in a hissing arc onto a growing stack. Around it ran a whole crew of neighbors, wagons rattling in from the fields, men shouting over the din, the separator howling steady under everything. And then at noon, the sudden quiet when the belt stopped and 20 hungry men sat down to a dinner the women had been cooking since dawn. Threshing day was the loudest, busiest, most social day of the farm year. Self-propelled combines made the crew, the machine, and the neighborly racket unnecessary by the early 60s, and harvest grew quiet and lonesome behind one man in a cab. Number 13, the windmill. Out by the stock tank, the steel windmill turned in the prairie wind, and it never quite shut up. The slow groan of the gears as the wheel came around. The rhythmic clank and sigh of the pump rod stroking up and down in the pipe. The metallic squeal when the tail swung to catch a shift in the breeze, and the whole tower shuddering in a gust. On a still night, the only sound for a mile was that lonesome creak and clank, water trickling into the tank for cattle that never went thirsty. A windmill pumped for free day and night, as long as the wind blew, and a farm kid climbed the tower more times than his mother ever knew. Electric pumps and rural power lines made the old mills unnecessary, and most were torn down for scrap. That creaking, clanking, sighing tower is a sound the open country lost. Number 12, the auctioneer's chant. Saturday at the sale barn, the air filled with a sound found nowhere else on earth, the rolling, rhythmic, almost musical chant of the livestock auctioneer. The words ran together into a hypnotic stream of numbers and filler. 2020, now 25. Gimme 25, 25, now 30, rising and falling without a breath, ringmen barking and pointing while calves bawled in the ring and bidders raised a finger so small you would miss it if you blinked. A farm kid sat in the bleachers eating a hot dog, mesmerized, trying to figure out who was buying and what a thing was worth. The sale barn was where the farm met the market, where a season's work turned into a check. Online cattle auctions and direct buying have hollowed out the local barns, and that hypnotic, breathless chant, once heard in every county seat, has gone quiet across much of rural America. Number 11, the market report on the radio. Mounted on the kitchen wall or sitting on the windowsill, the old AM radio crackled to life every noon for the farm market report, and the whole household hushed to hear it. Through a wash of static and the fading signal of a distant Clear Channel station, an announcer read the day's prices in a flat, hurried voice, hogs and corn and cattle and beans, then the weather that would decide whether you cut hay tomorrow. Stations like WLS out of Chicago and WHO out of Des Moines were lifelines, carrying prices and forecasts to families miles from the nearest town. Between the reports came the crackle of lightning interference and the slow drift of the signal in and out. That static-laced noon broadcast was how a farmer knew what his work was worth. Specialized cable channels and the internet replaced it, and the crackling daily ritual faded from the kitchen. Number 10, the crank wall telephone. On the wall hung the big oak telephone box with the crank on the side. Using it was a small ceremony. You lifted the heavy receiver off its hook, leaned into the mouthpiece, and turned the crank in short bursts. The little bell inside jangled with every spin to signal the operator down at the central office. Then you waited for her voice and asked her to connect you, often by name, because she knew everyone on the line. The whole thing was wood and brass and weight, mounted at adult height, so kids stood on a chair to reach it. The jangle of that hand crank and the clatter of the receiver onto its hook were everyday sounds in farm country well into the 60s. Direct dialing and the slow death of the local operator silenced the crank for good. A friendly voice that knew your family vanished with it. Number 9, the whip-poor will. As dusk settled over the farm and the chores wound down, a single bird began calling from the woods at the edge of the field, and its cry carried for what seemed like miles. The whip-poor will repeated its own name over and over in the gathering dark, a clear, insistent three-note whistle, again and again without tiring, until a kid lying in bed with the window open counted dozens in a row before sleep took him. It was the sound of a summer night in rural America, as much a part of dusk as the first stars and the smell of cut hay. But whip-poor wills need wide-open dark and big, bug-filled woods, and as farms gave way to subdivisions, pesticides, and porch lights, their numbers crashed. That haunting, repeating call has fallen silent across vast stretches of the country, and most kids today have never once heard it. Number 8, the mourning dove at first light. Before the rooster, before the alarm, the gray light of dawn brought the soft, sad cooing of the mourning dove from the wire and the eaves, a low, mournful coo, ooh, 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 that a kid mistook for an owl until somebody set him straight. Mixed in came the cheerful whistle of the bob-white quail out in the fence rows, calling its own name across the stubble, and the whole layered morning chorus of a working farm waking up. That gentle dove call was the first soft sound of the day, drifting through a window left open against the heat. Quail, in particular, have collapsed in number as fence rows were bulldozed and clean farming wiped out the brushy cover they needed. The dove still calls in places, but the rich dawn chorus that once surrounded every farmstead, doves and quail and meadowlarks together, has thinned to a whisper. Number 7, the butter churn. In the kitchen or out on the shady porch sat the stoneware churn, and turning cream into butter was a job handed straight to the kids. The wooden dasher went up and down through the hole in the lid, splash, thump, splash, thump. A slow, steady rhythm you kept up for what felt like an hour while your arms went numb. The sound changed as you worked, the loose slosh of the cream slowly thickening into a heavy, dragging slap, until at last the butter came and bits of yellow gold clung to the dasher. A glass churn with a hand crank made it a little easier, gears clicking as the paddles turned. That patient splash and thump was the sound of a farm making its own from nothing but a cow and some elbow grease. Store-bought butter and the deep freeze made churning pointless, and the rhythm died on the porch. Number 6, the steam whistle across the fields. Out across the section a few times a day came the long, lonesome wail of a train. Whistle rolling over the open ground. On the branch lines that crisscrossed farm country, plenty were still steam engines in the early part of the decade. The deep, throaty moan of the whistle for the crossing, the rhythmic chuff of the locomotive building speed, and the far-off clack of wheels on rail drifted for miles on a clear night, and a kid learned to tell time by it. The morning freight meant get moving. The evening train meant chores were nearly done. That whistle tied the loneliest farm to the wider world. Diesel engines with their flat air horns finished off the steam locomotives, and branch lines were torn up by the thousands. The haunting steam wail that once crossed every rural horizon is gone for good. Number 5, the schoolhouse bell. Down the road stood the one-room school, and the day began and ended with the teacher swinging the handbell on the front step or pulling the rope that rang the bell up in the little tower. That clear, bright clang carried across the fields, and farm kids walking the gravel knew it meant run. You're almost late. Inside, the same bell called everyone back from recess and dismissed them at the end of the day, all 8 grades together in one room around one stove. By the 60s, school consolidation was closing those little buildings by the hundreds, busing children miles away to big brick schools with electric buzzers instead of bells. The handbell on the step, the rope in the entryway, the clang that gathered a whole neighborhood's children, all of it fell silent as the one-room school passed into history. Most of those buildings are gone now too. Number 4, the party line. The telephone hung on the wall, but it didn't ring just for you because you shared the line with half the township. Every household on the party line had its own pattern: 2 longs and a short, 3 shorts, 1 long, and the rings jangled through every house at once. A farm kid learned to count those rings without thinking, ignoring the calls that weren't theirs and snapping to attention at their own. And everybody knew you could lift the receiver ever so gently and listen in on the neighbors, which is exactly how news traveled in the country. That distinctive coded ring and the soft click of somebody quietly picking up to eavesdrop were sounds every rural family lived with daily. Private lines and direct dialing ended the party line, and with it went both the coded ring and the listening in that knit a whole community together over a single shared wire. Number 3, the television sign-off. Late at night, after the last show, the television didn't just stop, it said goodbye. The screen filled with the flag waving as a tinny brass band played the national anthem. Then a stern voice signed the station off the air. And then came the sound that ended the day for a generation. The test pattern, that famous Indian head card, holding steady on the screen behind a single high, flat, unbroken electronic tone that droned on until somebody got up and turned the heavy dial with a solid clunk. Farm kids who'd fallen asleep on the floor woke to that tone humming in a dark room. There were only a few channels. The antenna had to be aimed just right, and when the broadcast day ended, it truly ended. Round-the-clock cable programming killed the sign-off, the anthem, and the test pattern tone. The screen never goes dark and quiet anymore. Number 2, the hand-crank ice cream freezer. Sunday afternoon in summer meant homemade ice cream, and the sound of it was the sound of the whole family on the back porch. The wooden bucket packed with ice and rock salt, the metal crank turning the canister inside, and that distinctive crunching, grinding churn as somebody, usually a kid, turned and turned and turned. The crank started easy and got harder as the cream froze, the grind growing slower and heavier until the strongest arm in the family had to finish it. Then the lid came off, the dasher was pulled out, dripping, and licked clean by whoever called it first, and everyone got a bowl. That grinding crank, the slosh of melting ice, the salty water running out the side, all of it meant Sunday, family, and reward for the work. Electric freezers and the supermarket aisle took the labor, the togetherness, and the sound away. Number 1, the dinner bell. Mounted on a post in the yard or up on the porch hung the big cast-iron dinner bell, and its ring was the most important sound a farm kid ever knew. At noon and again at dusk, Mama pulled the rope, and that deep rolling clang rang out across the whole place, over the corn and the pasture and the far back 40, calling everyone home. A boy a half-mile out in the field heard it, dropped what he was doing, and started walking, because that bell meant the meal was on the table and the work could wait. 3 hard rings in the middle of the afternoon meant something was wrong. Come quick, and your heart leaped. That iron bell was a mother's voice carried farther than any voice could reach. As families scattered and farms emptied, the dinner bell went silent on its post. Of every sound on this list, it's the one that could still stop a grown man in his tracks, if only he could hear it ring one more time. 25 sounds, and not one of them you can buy back. Which one did you hear first in your memory? The screen door, the dinner bell, the popping of that old John Deere? Tell me in the comments, and tell me which sound you would give anything to hear just one more time. Because these weren't only noises, they were the whole rhythm of a life that slipped away, and as long as we still remember how they sounded, that life isn't entirely gone.